Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Francesco, and with today's get-together, I'm so happy to see you. We're going to be covering Section 3.3 of Division B of the Ontario Building Code, which is safety within floor areas. In short, really, it's getting to this sign. Remember that? Now, this is a somewhat of a longer video, so what I am going to recommend is that you make use of the timestamps below to skip to the portion that you require, especially if you do have course notes that go with this, okay? I've created timestamps below that you can sort of, when you come back to this video, okay? I did not want to split it up. So what are we doing today? Remember topic 10, the video that's just before this, I kind of did an introduction to topic 11 and topic 12, or this topic and the upcoming topic. Topic 11, the one that we're in right now, deals with access to exits. So go check out topic 10, maybe if you want a refresher about what we're doing here. We're here for access to exits. This is what we're doing. We're doing this. We are trying to reach an exit. We're going to an exit, but not through an exit. So this is important. Okay, so let me just leave the correct sentence. This is the whole point of topic 11, what we're in right now that I discussed in topic 12. We're going to cover those requirements in Part 3, Division B of the Ontario Building Code to deal with the spaces in any floor area that allow you to reach an exit safely. Okay, but we're not going to be covering anything that relates to going through an exit. That's the next topic, topic 12. Okay, so this is what we're doing right now. We're trying to make our way to an exit, and we're going to see how those requirements in the Ontario Building Code relate to geometry and fire ratings and such. Here is how this relevant portion of the Ontario Building Code is set up. We're in Division B, Section 3.3, safety within floor areas. It's set up like this, okay? It has all of these subsections under it. The first one, it relates to all floor areas. The second one, subsection 3.3.2, relates to assembly occupancies. The third one relates to B major occupancies. The fourth one relates to C major occupancies. And this one here relates to F major occupancies. And finally, under 3.3.6, we have hazardous areas. So these are areas that, regardless of the specific type of occupancy, that are considered hazardous. There's also some terminology that I want to make sure I get out of the way, because we will use some of this terminology in this topic. And when you see it, I don't want you to be surprised by it. This is terminology that's specifically identified and defined by the Ontario Building Code. It is written, as you can see, in an italic font. So that means that under Division A, Article 1.4.1.2, these words have a specific definition that is specifically used by the Ontario Building Code. Okay, remember from topic 1? So these are going to be the items that we're going to be covering terminology-wise. We're going to talk about suites, public corridors, closures, and means of egress. Now, did you also notice how some of these words also have images next to it, like a flame and a ruler next to it? And that's because here in the bottom corner of this, like on your screen, there's either going to be a flame like this, or there's going to be a ruler like this. Because for each one of these items, we're going to be covering how the Ontario Building Code deals with the fire resistance rating or fire protection rating, basically fire rating of that space and the dimensions of that space. Okay, so look for what you have here in the bottom right of your screen, because that will tell you in the video what we're doing, if it's fire rated or if it's dimension related, okay? So let's start with suites. And as you can see, we're going to be talking about the fire rating of suites. Suites. See how it's an italicized font? that means that that word, suite, is specifically defined under Division A, Article 1.4.1.2 of the Ontario Building Code. Go check out what the Ontario Building Code says about that. It's important. You should read it. I've kind of summarized it here, but the way that I like to think of suites is that it's either one room or a group of rooms together that are used by the occupants to live. Okay? So that's where you can eat, sleep, bathe, use washrooms, that kind of thing. You can live in there, and they're grouped because you can live in there. Because sometimes you need more than one room, say like in an apartment type of thing. Okay? So an example that I have here is a general story in an office building. As you can see here, we have 7 suites, A through G, and here we have a public men's and women's washroom. Here we have an electrical room. Here we have an elevator. There is even a janitor room right here and 2 exit stairs. The reason we're going to be covering suites is because we want to look at how suites are separated for the purposes of fire, right? Because we want to make sure that these separations between each of the suites allow for the occupants of those suites to be safe. So that means I want to teach you about the fire resistance rating of the fire separations between the suites. And if you remember, fire separations are those, I think we discussed them in topic 7. They're those barriers, those continuous barriers. So let's talk about the fire resistance rating, that is assigning a unit of time to those fire separations. According to sentence 3.3.1.11, except for D major occupancies, okay, so this is business and personal services, it's 1 hour. According to sentence 2, this 1 hour can be reduced to 45 minutes if the fire resistance rating that you get for other items under subsection 3.2.2 for that major occupancy is less than 45 minutes. And I would invite you to go check out topics 5 and 6 about this. That's where we covered subsection 3.2.2. Finally, under sentence 3, that is 3.3.1.13, no fire resistance rating is necessary between suites as long as that space is sprinklered, and there are some other requirements for this. So go check it out, okay? Now let's talk about public corridors. Public corridors, again, is a defined term in the Ontario Building Code. So you'll find a definition under Article 1.4.1.2 under Division A. Public corridors are corridors that provide access to exits for more than one suite. Okay, so this is important. If more than one suite share this corridor to get them to an exit, it's called a public corridor. It's a shared corridor. So if we go back to that story that I showed you in the office building, you can see right here, this is the separation between the public corridor and all the other suites. Those separations need to be fire separations, okay? And they require also fire resistance rating, a rating in time between the corridor and the suite. So that's the walls that basically separate the suites from the corridor. In general terms, under sentence 3.3.1.41, a fire separation is always required unless noted otherwise. Okay, so the general rule of thumb is between any suite and a public corridor, those must always be made, designed and built as fire separations. Okay, there are some exceptions that we're going to get to in a moment. When it comes to fire resistance ratings for those fire separations, sentence 2 says that the fire resistance rating needs to be more than 45 minutes, except for those exceptions that you have under sentence 2. Now, under sentence 3, if that space is not a B or a C major occupancy, but is sprinklered, then no fire resistance rating is required, but it still must be a fire separation. Finally, under sentence 4, it says that no fire separation, no fire resistance rating is required if that space is sprinklered, and a number of other requirements are met under those clauses under that sentence. One such clause is C for public washrooms, and what it basically says is that you don't need a fire separation and a fire resistance rating between the corridor and a public washroom as long as, let me show you, we're back to our general layout. So you see the women's and men's washroom here. Right now there is that thick line right here between the women's and men's washrooms and the public corridor. That indicates a fire separation with a fire resistance rating. However, if you separate the women's and men's washroom from the suites with a fire separation having a fire resistance rating, then the women's and men's washroom do not need to be separated from the public corridor with a fire separation and a fire resistance rating. Okay? Let's move on to closures. What are closures? Obviously, it's written in italics, so that means that it's specifically defined under Division A, Article 1.4.1.2. So go check it out what it says. In general terms, I've kind of written it here, but let me try to describe it for you. So you know, say, how the suites need to be separated from the public corridor, right? With a fire separation. But a fire separation, for all intents and purposes, is a continuous and solid wall. Well, if you're inside those suites, you need a way to get through those walls. And what we do in construction is we punch holes in those walls that, for example, we call doors or windows, right? So that we can move through these spaces that otherwise would be solid walls. So closures is what the Ontario Building Code uses as a word to describe those devices and all of their related assembly that close any openings in a fire separation. Literally, okay? Because otherwise it would just be a hole in that fire separation. Okay? So that includes stuff like doors, shutters, dampers, wired glass, blocks, and all of their components. So it's not just the door, it's also everything that goes into making that door assembly. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, right now, you and I in this introductory course, we're looking at closures as doors. Okay, maybe even windows, but we're going to stick to doors because that's the way that I wanted to get it across to you. Okay, so in this setup here, right, the closures are these doors. Notice how I did not include these doors, because these doors go to exit. They're exit doors, okay? So it's only the doors that allow getting out of a suite and into the public corridor, or getting out of the washrooms and into the public corridor, and so on, okay? So how are closures handled from a fire rating perspective? You have to go to a slightly different place. We're no longer under subsection 3.3. We're actually under subsection 3.1.8, okay? Fire separations and closures. And what this portion of part 3 basically deals with is saying that whatever closure you have in a fire separation, so doors in this case, their contribution to the fire rating of that fire separation must be equivalent to the protection offered by that fire separation. So let me use regular English words, okay? Whatever door you put in a fire separation has to provide a similar amount of protection than that would be there if there weren't no door, if it was just a solid wall, okay? Now here's an interesting thing. Doors are not rated according to a fire resistance rating. Remember FRR? Instead, Doors are rated according to a fire protection rating, FPR. So here's an interesting thing. As soon as you see fire protection rating in hours or minutes, you know it's related to closures. And for us, it's going to be mostly doors. Whereas if you see fire resistance ratings, you know it's related to fire separations like walls, floors, ceilings, roofs, that sort of thing. Okay? So let me show you a little bit about fire protection ratings and how they're determined for closures, for doors, okay? For us, it's doors. Figuring out the fire protection rating of a closure is answering a yes or no question. This is the question. Is that closure allowed to be a 20-minute closure? Okay? If the answer is yes, then it's 20 minutes. If the answer is no, then you get the fire protection rating from right here. Okay? So if you go to sentence 3.1.8.12.1, under that sentence, all the clauses under there will give you the guideline to evaluate whether or not that closure is allowed to be a 20-minute fire protection rating. If none of these conditions apply, so if the answer is not yes, then you have to go to table 3.1.8.4 to find the fire protection rating of that assembly. So maybe, can I show you? Maybe can I just show this to you? Would that be okay? I'm just going to show you, see if make this work. Magic, okay? So here we have the digital copy of the Ontario Building Code, okay? And right here we have Article 3.1.8.12. Under sentence 1 right here, you're going to find in all the clauses and subclauses all the requirements that allow you to identify whether or not that closure can be a 20-minute closure. If none of these requirements under sentence 1 apply, then we have to go to this table, table 3.1.8.4. And you always hope that it's this table because this table is super easy to do, right? You'll notice on the left-hand side of this table, there is a column that has the fire resistance rating of that fire separation. So as soon as you know this for your wall, floor, ceiling, roof, then you go to the right-hand column right here, right? And that has the fire protection rating of the closure. So as long as you have the fire resistance rating of a assembly, you can then determine the fire protection rating. But you can only use this table only if it's not a 20-minute closure. Okay, that's the only way that you're allowed to use that table. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. Okay. All right, now I wanted to show you also this video here because it kind of shows immediately the whole benefit of having closures. Okay, this is in a house. It's a nice house, you can tell, but it was subject to a fire. And look at that door. That's the door separating the house from the bedroom. It's all burned, but look inside of this bedroom. This bedroom was not affected by the fire beyond what firefighters had to do to save the occupants in the house, right? Look, it's not affected. And this is not even a fire-rated door. It's just a closure, okay? So I just wanted to show you that, to show you the benefits of having closures that are fire-rated because they make a big difference, okay? Also, in the description below, I'm going to give you a link that has other images of some of the benefits of fire protection ratings for fire doors and how they can make a big difference to the occupants and their safety and the contents and that kind of stuff. So go check it out. I think it's kind of cool. All right. There are some other requirements related to closures in a fire separations. I've listed them here, but I'm not going to cover them. I am listing them here so you can go check them out for yourself. Okay. But this is a bit beyond what we're going to be doing in our introductory course. And I think that for now, we're done with fire-related stuff and ratings. We're going to move actually to geometry and dimensions of that space and those various items. So let's do that. Let's start with the minimum corridor width. So in our case, that's the public corridor that we just learned about. This is going to be now, we're back under section 3.3, safety within floor areas. And I want to try to illustrate how to determine the minimum width of corridors. And to be fair, this also works for stairs, ramps, and the like, and doors too, using a scene from a movie called Inception. It's an older movie. Some of you might not have seen it, but I want to describe this particular scene. Cue action music. So we have our protagonist. Our protagonist is being chased by the bad guys. And our protagonist saw the bad guys and is running away. And there are so many people on the street that the protagonist has to fight off those people, right? Just elbow his way out, those people out of the way to make sure that he gets to safety. He sees a place that he can get out of, but it's super tight. Like, it looks like that not even one person can get through. So our protagonist is trying to get through, pushes. The bad guys are arriving, and the protagonist makes it through. Okay? I'm introducing this scene, and you can go check out the movie. It's done a lot better in the movie. Okay? Because when it comes to figuring out the minimum width of a corridor, according to Part 3 of the Ontario Building Code and Section 3.3, the minimum width of a corridor, and this is true also for ramps, stairs that are not exits, is the largest of two things. The minimum width that would allow one person to easily and safely get through. This is always the minimum that you're allowed to have. And the minimum width for all people to get through. So not only must that corridor or stairs or ramp or door be big enough for one person to get through, but it must also be big enough for all the people that are expected to be in that space to get through safely. You find these two widths and you always pick the larger one of the two. So let me show you how to do it for one person. Okay, you'll find this in Part 3 of the Ontario Building Code, Division B, specifically under Sentence 1 and 2. These ones here, 3.3.1.9, 1 and 2. For corridors, the minimum width of a corridor for one person to get through safely is 1,100 millimeters. Unless you're dealing with a corridor for patients in hospitals, and then it must go up to 2,400 millimeters according to sentence 3.3.32. Or if it's a corridor that's serving non-ambulatory residents in B2 or B3 occupancies. And just to translate, non-ambulatory residents means people, patients sometimes, that cannot move themselves, that have to be moved by others, okay? Then the width of the corridor must be 1,650 millimeters. Okay, for stairs and ramps, sentence 3.3.114.1 for this course will direct us to these two tables, table 3.4.3.2a and b. And I'm just going to show you those two tables super quickly. Okay, if I could. Let's see, right here. Okay, so this is the reference, 3.3.1.14.1. Okay, for the purposes of this course, this sentence will direct us to these two tables. You see these two tables, 3.4.3.2a. Notice how they're set up, okay? For A table, the major occupancies that are allowed to be used are these ones here only. For the B table, you're only allowed to use this table for B2 and B3 occupancies, right? And then you can see in all of the columns that then follow in both tables, you have ramps right here, stairs right here, and doorways right here. The minimum widths for one person to get through, okay? Now, the only one you're not allowed to use right now for this topic is this column right here. Exit corridors and passageway right here. Because for this topic, we're not dealing with exits. So it's kind of weird. I wanted to point this out to you that Part 3, Section 3.3 directs us to these two tables for the minimum width of ramps, stairs, and doorways for one person to get through. Okay? but I wanted you to be aware of this. Okay. All right, let's get back here. Amazing. Now, we figured out those were the minimum geometric dimensions for one person to get through. What about accounting for all the people that could be there? This, as you remember, figuring out how many people are going to be in a space, that's called the occupant load of that space, right? So in fact, sentence 3.3.117.1 says that to figure out the minimum width of a corridor or a door or non-exit ramps or non-exit stairs, you must also use the occupant load. We know how to do that, right? Topic 3 and 4, okay? 4, I think it was. And what the building code says for non-exit related dimensions is that depending on what you're looking at, you have to use the correct sentence. So under this sentence here, 3.3.1.17.2, for every person, you have to give that specific item 6.1 millimeters of width. And that's for low slope ramps, doorways, and corridors, 6.1 millimeters per person. Under sentence 3, that goes up to 9.2 millimeters per person for steep slope ramps. Under sentence 4, that goes up to 18.4 millimeters per person for ramps, doorways, and corridors for patients or residents in a B2 or they should say B3 occupancy, okay? And under sentence 5, it says that for stairs, in addition to these dimensions that you get, considering all people, you must also use these requirements that are included in these sentences, okay? So go check these out for your consideration. All right, now I also want to point out that a lot of this is related to the next topic, that's topic 12. So stay tuned for topic 12 because it will cover a lot of other stuff related to 3.4 items, but that's coming as the next topic. Okay, we've reached the part where I want to do some examples for you, but I won't do it in this video, I don't think, because that's going to make this video too long. So instead, I'm going to include the links for these examples, example 1, 2, and example 3. I'm going to include links in the description below to those solved examples. Basically, these examples are 3 different examples of determining the minimum width of a corridor, public corridor that is, for different type of major occupancies, okay, and that process. Now, this is the same process that would be used also to figuring out the minimum width of ramps, the minimum width of non-exit stairs and doors and the like. You'll get more of that practice in your homework, so you've got this. All right. Now, I want to move on to this topic here because it's relevant and important because it relates to so-called dead-end corridors. Under sentences 3.3.1.38 and 9, for those floor areas that have more than one suite, so basically the ones that say have a public corridor, right? Every exterior, you should be able to basically exit those suites, any one of those suites, okay? Either through an exit door in that suite or into a doorway into a public corridor, typically, okay? And if you do choose to exit that suite into the public corridor, if that is your only option to exit that suite, you must be able to go in any direction in that corridor, so left or right, towards an exit, okay? If that's not possible, if you cannot go left or right as soon as you exit your suite into the corridor towards an exit, you have a so-called dead-end corridor. Now, there are some exceptions to these requirements here that to define dead-end corridors, and they're included in sentences 5 and 6 under Article 3.3.4.4, and it relates more to small multi-unit residential buildings. But maybe I want to use this image here that I put in your course notes to illustrate what I mean by dead-end corridors. So look at this for a moment. Let's pretend, you see that red dot on the far end? That red dot, that's you've just exited, went through the door to get out of suite E. So you're in the public corridor. So that means you have a choice. You can turn right to go towards this exit, or you can turn left to go towards this exit, right? Those two exit stairs. Now, for a moment, now let's look at suites D and G, which I've highlighted up here, if I could, okay? You're in suite D. So if you get out of suite D and you turn one direction, you could possibly not go towards a exit stair or some kind of exit. You might actually hit a wall. And that's bad, right? Because you should be able to exit any of the suites you're in and always know that regardless of what direction you go in, you're going to go in the direction of an exit to get out to safety so that you're safe, right? But if this happens, you're in a dead-end corridor, right? And maybe that's not a good thing, because then you have to double back to go in the opposite direction to finally reach that exit. Now, dead-end corridors are never allowed except for these exceptions here, which I'm going to cover in a moment, okay? So here are the exceptions to when dead-end corridors are allowed. Let's start with sentence 3.3.1.96 for A type of major occupancies, so assembly type of occupancies. What we get from that sentence is that dead-end corridors are allowed only if there is another way out of that suite that does not lead into a dead-end corridor. So for example, say if suite D or G have a second exit that goes on, exterior exit stairs or something similar, okay? That's the only way that dead-end corridors are allowed for assembly type occupancies. Under sentence 3.3.1.97 for C major occupancies, so residential type occupancies, okay, dead-end corridors are allowed only if they're less than 6 meters, right? And the distance is from the middle of the doorway to an exit to that dead end. If that distance is less than or equal to 6 meters, you're allowed to have a dead-end corridor unless it's a retirement home, okay, under 3.3.4.11.10. Retirement homes need to be super safe, okay? So you're not allowed dead-end corridors in C major occupancies if it's a retirement home. Otherwise, up to 6 meters is good. For D, E, F2, and F3 major occupancies, sentences 3.3.1.99 to 11 say that dead-end corridors are allowed if they're no more than 9 meters and they serve up to 30 people, right? If that dead-end corridor is for up to 30 people, and there are self-closing devices on the doors, okay? That's the only way that dead-end corridors are allowed. Another way that they're allowed is if there is a second way to get out of those suites that does not lead into a dead-end corridor. But notice how these requirements are very specific and restrictive, okay? Only if these happen, you're allowed a dead-end corridor in these major occupancies. Finally, F1 major occupancies under sentence 3.3.1.912, dead-end corridors are only allowed if there is another way out of that suite that's affected by the dead-end corridor that does not lead into the dead-end corridor, okay? So it has to be some kind of separate egress or exit in each one of those suites that does not use that public corridor. B major occupancies, remember those? Okay, under sentence 3.3.3.31, B major occupancies allow dead-end corridors if and only if there is another way out of that suite that does not lead into the public corridor and the dead-end corridor, okay? All right, that's it for dead-end corridors. It's a lot, but you'll get to practice this when you do the homework, okay? So let's talk suite egress doors, okay? So we covered previously when it came to those doors to get out of a suite, suite egress doors, we looked at the fire protection rating, right? For those closures, remember that? Well, what we're going to be doing now is just talk a little bit more about their dimensioning and how they're called. Notice how they're not called exit doors. They're called egress doors because they're not part of an exit. So I'm talking about these doors here to get out of a suite. And those doors allow for the occupants of each one of these suites to get into this public corridor. Okay? Now, we're going to cover now how many are going to be required, the location that have to be in the suite, the direction of swing of those doors, push or pull, and what the width needs to be of those doors. So let's start with how many suite egress doors are required in any suite. Sentence 3.3.1.51 says that at least 2 egress doors are required if the requirements of this sentence are met. These are the 5 requirements that, allow for more than 1 egress door. So if your suite is more than 15 meters square and its occupancy is either a hazardous room or an F1 occupancy, then you're allowed more than 1 egress door, so at least 2. And now all of these other ones, I'm going to read them out. So if any one of these apply, you're allowed more than 1 egress door from your suite. So for example, if that suite is intended for more than 60 people, the occupant load of that suite, or if that space is not sprinklered and the area or the travel distance in that space exceeds the requirements of table 3.3.1.5a, then you require at least a second door. If that space is sprinklered, not F1, and the area in that space is greater than what you find in this table, 3.3.1.5b, or the travel distance in that space is more than 25 meters, or lastly, if that suite is more than 100 meters squared and it contains either a hazardous classroom in an elementary or secondary school. So think even like a shop space, right? Some shop spaces in elementary or secondary schools can be hazardous classrooms. If any one of these is true, then you need at least 2 egress doors, or as this sentence says, more than 1 egress door. I want to talk a little bit about travel distance. Travel distance is basically how much any occupant anywhere in that suite, the distance that they have to travel to reach the closest egress door. So you can imagine that, depending on where you are in a suite, there might be a very short or a very large distance for you to travel to get to that suite egress door. So that's why some of these requirements, right, they minimize or they put a limit on the travel distance for you to get out of that suite. Okay, where are the doors supposed to be in a suite? What is their location? According to these 2 sentences, then, if you find that in fact more than 1 egress door is required, then those egress doors have to be located so that 1/3 of the maximum diagonal dimension of that area is served. Okay, so you have to basically find that maximum diagonal dimension of that suite and take 1/3 of it as the maximum distance between the egress doors, which can then also end up meaning that you need more than 1 egress door if you want to make sure that the travel distance is reduced, maybe more than 2, maybe more than 3. So what we get from here basically is that if the travel distance to the nearest egress door is less than the requirements here, okay, then you might need a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th egress door. Because again, you cannot be expected to travel a very large distance to reach the nearest egress door to get to safety, right? To get out of a suite and then towards an exit. So check out these requirements, okay? Just so that you're aware of them. Let's talk about direction of swing. That is, whether this door to get out of a suite, is a push door or a pull door. So you can imagine that if think of the classrooms that you've been in, my dear students. Have all the classrooms always been push doors or pull doors? Right? Maybe it's one, maybe it's the other, maybe some have both, okay? But look at this. If you have a lot of people rushing towards the door in the event of an emergency, say in a classroom that you're in, can you see how if you have to pull the door with a whole bunch of people behind you, rushing behind you, that you can kind of get stuck right in the door as you're trying to pull it towards you? So sometimes maybe push door needs to happen. And what happens basically is that there are some requirements that say whether or not your door is a push or a pull door. That's what the direction of swing is. But first, let's cover this sentence here. Under 3.3.1.11.1, Part 3 of the Ontario Building Code says that for non-exit spaces, your doors must swing on a vertical axis, just like this. And the vertical axis basically refers to this. Okay, the hinges on this side of the door that allow the door to swing along a vertical axis, this vertical axis right here. Okay, otherwise it would be a door that swings about a horizontal axis. The exception to that is under this article 3.3.112, which is for sliding doors, right? They don't swing, but they slide. And even then they have some requirements for swinging, okay? So what about the direction of swing then? Is it a push or a pull? Well, we just saw one good reason why maybe if there's too many people, it can't be a pull door because you might just end up being against the door. But if it's a push door, right, this might happen. People walking in that corridor might get slammed in their face. That's not good. So there are some requirements to decide if it's going to be a push or a pull door, okay? Under sentence 2, so this is sentence 3.3.1.11.2. A door must swing in the direction of exiting. So that's if you're in a suite or a classroom, it's a push door. If the occupant load in that suite or classroom is more than 60, or if that space is an F1 major occupancy or is a hazardous classroom in an elementary or secondary school, it's a push door. If these don't apply, both of them, then it can be a pull door. Okay? Now, I'm talking about basically these doors to get out of the suites. You'll notice that some of them are push, these ones here, and some of them are pull, these ones here. Look at the push ones for suite E. Okay? Do you notice how these two doors for suite E are recessed? And that's because when you try to exit those doors by pushing, you don't want to hit anybody in the face, so you can recess them in, right? But if you can't recess the doors in, another way to do it is to put a barrier like this on this push door, so that when you open that door, right, people are already going around that barrier and won't get hit in the face. The only thing, though, that you have to be aware of for these kinds of situations is that these kind of barriers cannot then reduce the width of the public corridor, right? Remember how we figured out the width of a public corridor? So these obstructions cannot reduce the minimum width of that public corridor. Okay, so then let's talk about the width of egress doors. This is relatively straightforward. According to these two clauses, 3.3.1.13, 1A and 1B, the clear opening of a closure needs to be 850 millimeters. So when you open a door, whether it's push or pull, that clear opening, right, that when you get the door open, has to be 850 millimeters. So that means that the door actually has to be wider than that, right? Because when it opens, it allows for less room. Now, there are other requirements related to suite egress doors that you can find here. I've linked them for you, so go check them out. But I'm not going to cover them because they're a little bit beyond what we're covering in this introductory course. We're getting close, I promise you. I'm going to talk about janitor rooms. And for janitor rooms, look at how we went back to talk about fire-related items. So protection ratings, resistance ratings, separations, fire separations, that kind of thing. And that's because janitor rooms are very special and specific. You can find janitor rooms in many of the buildings that have many of the major occupancies, and they're important to deserve their own treatment because typically, I'm going to even say maybe always, they contain volatile and hazardous chemicals that can cause a lot of problems, right? If a fire happens in a janitor room, it's a big issue because what's inside there can cause a lot of problems if it catches fire or if it mixes incorrectly, okay? So what that means then is that occupants in buildings have to be protected from these potential hazards you get from janitor rooms. So what I want to tell you about is what the fire separation requirements and resistance rating requirements are of those fire separations for janitor rooms. They're covered under these three sentences. So 3.3.1.22, 1, 2, 3. Respectively, what they say is that you always must build your janitor room so that the walls and the floors and the ceiling must always be fire separations, and it must always be 1 hour. Unless the requirements of sentence 2 are met, where 45 minutes is allowed, unless it's sprinklered, where it must still be a fire separation, but no fire resistance rating are required for the wall, floor, and ceiling of that space, okay? Hey, I know that sound. It means that we come to the end of our presentation. So check out homework for week 6, which will get you to practice a lot of these things and go through the relevant portions of the Ontario Building Code. Don't forget that I've linked for you below the examples I did not cover here, just so you can see the examples on their own as often as needed. And thank you. Okay, I'm glad that you're here. The next topic to be covered is going to be topic 12, which is exits. And that's for Division B, Section 3.4 of the Ontario Building Code. Take care, everyone. Bye.